Hi, I'm Anuj Malhotra. I'm the Dean of the George Washington University School of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this episode of George Talks Business. Today, we have a very special guest. We are honored to have Mayor Muriel Bowser of D.C. Mayor. She does not need any introduction, so I'm going to get right to the point
thank
here.
Thank you, Dean.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, always my pleasure to be on campus and hear from you and all your great students.
Great. So let me start by saying, first of all, congratulations. I believe you are the first female mayor to be reelected in D.C. And I know a mayor's job is a complicated job, based entirely just on the number of questions that have been submitted for me to ask you today, and variety of them. But take us through a typical day. What if there is such a thing as a typical day in a mayor's life?
Well, the days are, they're different every day, but there's a rhythm to being mayor, and this is my 5th year of being mayor, so I get the rhythms of the job. It is true, I am the second woman to have been reelected, and I'm the first mayor to be reelected in 16 years. Being a local government official puts you in front of your constituents each and every day in your day-to-day life. And being able to understand their vision for how our city will go into the next generation is critical to winning their trust and keeping their trust. And so we work very hard at that every single day. There are a few buckets of what my work entails, and that's the day-to-day leadership of the community, managing a staff of 37,000 people, managing stakeholder relationships, including with the Council of the District of Columbia, our constituency groups, including our business community, our advocacy community, and community groups, so that's hugely important. I propose a budget to the council every single year, a balanced budget, and that process is pretty much a 12-month process, and we're working on that each and every day, and advancing a legislative agenda. So since it's Monday, let me tell you what my Monday's like. Monday tends to be a long day for me, and I've learned over the years to kind of manage my hours, and now that I have a little girl, that's even more important. But I start the day off on Mondays in a senior staff meeting, and I also usually focus Mondays on my inside meetings. So I will meet with my senior team. I meet with the police chief on Mondays. Every other Monday, I meet with the chancellor of schools, and I do administrative work. And then I have the evening, because it's a long day for me, to do outside meetings in the evening. And so that's pretty typical of how my day unfolds. I've also made a point, since I've been mayor, to go to all of our advisory neighborhood commissions. I know you know about advisory neighborhood commissions, and travel the city doing those things. So I spend a number of evenings during a week out in the community.
Well, that sounds like a very busy day, and so we are especially thankful that you carved some time today to talk to us. So in all of these, tell us about what's the most rewarding part of being mayor, and perhaps what is most challenging, where you really don't feel good about things?
Well, being mayor is largely rewarding. I will tell people that if you can be mayor of your hometown, it's about the best job you can have if you are interested in public service. And I started out when I was coming out of college. I wasn't really quite sure what I would do, and then I realized that local government service, and in particular local government, was where my skills and interests were really best managed. And I thought maybe I would be in government, that I would lead an agency. And I learned pretty quickly that the best ways to make change the fastest for the most people was to be an elected official. And in D.C., that is even more true because we are a city, county, state, school district, unique, totally unique in the American system of government. And there are basically 14 people that can take an idea from conception to delivery to 700,000 people in a matter sometimes less than one budget cycle. And I can't really think of another place in government where that's the case.
So this, as a mayor, you're constantly in the limelight. Constantly in the limelight. You're always being judged and noticed. How do you stay focused?
It's important to stay focused because it is true. And we're covered by the Washington Post. And we're, in the cradle of, of the Congress, of the White House, and everything that always swirls around Washington. And staying focused locally is important. And we're a little different because while I'm a mayor, I have the same functions as a governor. And our kind of coverage and our scrutiny is different than our regional governors. And so it is very important to keep an eye on what you're doing. I learned early on as mayor. In my first month as mayor, we had a very terrible incident that happened on our metro. There was a metro accident. A woman was killed. Many people were hurt. Our firefighters ran into a dark, smoky tunnel and saved a lot of people. And as a brand new mayor, having to navigate that communication taught me a lot about getting back on the agenda. I was literally followed by our local press corps probably for 10 straight days. Wherever I went, there was somebody asking me a question, and I was the only one talking to the press. Not Metro, not the Transportation Safety Board, just me. And I realized then that our whole early days, first 100 days, could be consumed by this one event. And while it was hugely important, and Metro was hugely important, and it had to be accountability for a person who lost her life, it was the agenda that we had was also hugely important to get started and stay focused on. So I realized that you have to have a mechanism when you're leading a major city to deal with emergencies, because emergencies will happen, but have a team around you that can quickly shift back to your agenda.
So we are sitting in a business school.
Yep.
We want to talk a little bit about leadership.
Please.
A lot of kids grow up, and when they are asked what do they want to become when they grow up, they say, we want to be a mayor of a city. So what kind of characteristics do you think are necessary to be leading as a mayor?
There's one big one, and that's courage. If you are not courageous, don't bother running for mayor. You may win. You may even get a chance to govern, but you won't do anything. And it won't even be worth it. And it especially won't be worth it to the people that you serve. And so if you talk to anybody who sat in the seat, the ability to make tough decisions is the most critical part of being a mayor.
Well said. I think you also ran, and again, it's a business question here, you also ran an obviously DC campaign. Marketing campaign to attract businesses, et cetera. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where we are with that?
Sure. Obviously, DC is an outgrowth of our planning and economic development efforts. And it is also an outgrowth of our necessity to brand the city as a place that is friendly to do business, but also different than it used to be. Frequently, you can go around this country and find people who are totally ignorant of what's happening in D.C., how we're set up, that we're not the D.C. of the 1990s, we're not the D.C. of the 1950s. You'll hear me sometimes say we're not your grandfather's Washington. So in some people's minds, we are only the White House in the Capitol. And in some other people's minds, nobody lives here. Believe it or not. So we're constantly educating people on the structure of our government, the robust economic activity that happens in D.C., the outstanding way that we're running our government, balancing budgets, having AAA bond ratings, and the like, and attracting private sector business. So the obviously D.C. campaign was developed around our Amazon pitch. In most ways, but we knew then, even with the campaign for Amazon, to get Amazon to our region, that this campaign would fit any major employer. And so what we talk about is all the reasons why a major private sector employer would want to locate in Washington.
So that's great. You mentioned Amazon. So Amazon is now coming into this neighborhood. How is that going to impact DC? And what kind of influence and what kind of things that institution like George Washington can play a role in that?
Well, I think Amazon is very good for our region because it is going to attract tens of thousands of jobs, high-paying jobs, and that is critical to how our region moves forward, not just D.C., but the surrounding area. It also, we think that one tech job spins off about 4 other jobs that support that tech job. So we will be able to hire people along the educational spectrum, skills spectrum, and income spectrum because of tech giants that we attract here. Now, we also have a strategy like Amazon, but there are others like Yelp who have located and started on the West Coast, and they're really tapped out in their ability to attract talent. They kind of tapped out all of their partnerships, and so they are looking for outposts on the East and in other parts of the country where they can still attract tech talent. And it is important on all of our higher education institutions, George Washington, who are focused on making sure that your graduates have a pipeline to jobs to create those types of partnerships.
Great. So let me ask you a question that is on top of mind of a lot of students and alumni and the millennials particularly, when you start looking at transportation needs. And given the move towards more sustainable transportation needs, what has your office been doing, and what are your thoughts about how DC can be benefiting from that?
Well, DC certainly is in leadership in alternative transportation. And we have been for a number of years. We have one of the best metro systems, in my view, anywhere in the nation. It takes its hits from time to time, but I challenge you to go other places in the U.S. and find one that's clean and is friendly and is welcoming. Now, its detriment is that it doesn't operate in a way that a growing city is operating. We need longer hours. We need different service. And that's not just heavy rail that I'm talking about. And I think that we have an ability to make our bus network really better serve the needs of our residents and visitors and employees. So we continue to work on that. One thing, for example, my administration will unveil is a bus-only route on 16th Street that has been a long time in the making and design. We recently proposed a total transformation of K Street, which I'm sure that you're paying close attention to, which will allow us to take service lanes that are underutilized or misutilized and turn them into a better curbside space for all of us. So we'll have dedicated bus, dedicated bike, and better use of the travel lanes. Those are hugely important. And then we'll continue to look at ways we can manage congestion in our city. Now, I'm of the view that higher costs in the city, total gridlock and transportation are the things that could hinder the growth of this region. So we always have to pay careful attention to how we're moving people around. And keeping in mind, too, that not only are people moving, living, working in different places, we're also asking our network to do things that we didn't even imagine 5 years ago, like allow trucks to deliver something within an hour everywhere all the time. And so we have to make sure that our network is robust enough, but also nimble enough to address that.
So this is actually a very interesting topic for many of our students and faculty who work in the Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis and are working on walkable urban cities. And this is the kind of thing that is why we have been noticing it even more so, as you mentioned. But along with all this, we also know that DC is one of the expensive places to live in. And there is always going to be need for more lower income housing. What are some of the things that you are thinking about or have done for accommodating lower income housing and promoting them?
So I always tell people that we are at an amenity-rich place. You say expensive, I say amenity-rich. We have, and the taxpayers of the district have been willing to make the types of investments that have made our city a very desirable place to live. As recently as 5 years ago, we had a 1,000 people a month moving to Washington, D.C. a month.
Wow.
Now we're at about 800 a month moving to Washington. And so anytime you have that kind of demand, you're going to have huge demand on your housing stock and your housing prices, and that's certainly what we've seen. It has been a hallmark of the work that my administration has done to create more units, more affordable units, so that we can have some impact on those housing prices. For example, we have a tool called the Housing Production Trust Fund. And when I became mayor, the city was spending about $50 million a year in the trust fund. Now we're over $100 million, and we have been for each of my 5 budgets submitted to the council, and that's important. But it's still not enough. At the beginning of this year, the beginning of my second term, I put out a challenge to my team that D.C. would be the only jurisdiction so far in the region to meet our shortfall. The Regional Council of Governments estimates that the region is about 240,000 units short of meeting demand by 2025. Mm-hmm. Our share of that regional shortfall is 36,000 units. And so we put out a charge to create those 36,000 units by 2025. But I went a step further and recently looked at the city and set targets for neighborhoods by planning area. So there are 10 planning areas in Washington, D.C., and we will have a goal for each of those planning areas of the number of units it needs to produce. Only by setting the goal, setting targets by neighborhood, and making sure that we have the tools that we need to partner with the private sector will we get there. But that's the type of planning that we need to do across our entire region.
So that's great. I think in 2018, you actually nominated 25 census tracts in D.C. to be federally recognized opportunity zones.
I did.
And that was so that they were qualified for investments in new businesses. So where are we after a year? Has that worked out? Has that been useful?
Well, it's one tool, and certainly we looked across the area at projects that we thought were fledgling and that would benefit from a private sector boost. And we put those in place, and I think that they are actually attracting investment in the way that we thought they would. Mm-hmm. But it's one tool. And sometimes, especially in housing and development, we think we have a silver bullet, but in fact, it takes layers and layers of financing and partnership to get affordable projects done.
So connection with that, I had a submitted question that I'm going to read out
Sure.
to you. It says, you have been a leader in pushing the revitalization of St. Elizabeth's East Campus in District 8, which has been in development for many years. On November 14th, you announced a new state-of-the-art health center for the campus. What are the anticipated economic and social impacts of this center for the district and the region as a whole?
Well, it's critical. It sounds like the questioner is referring to my announcement that Whitman Walker would be going to St. Elizabeth's East. And Whitman Walker is our first major tenant outside of ourselves. We talk a lot about our ability to kind of unstick some projects that had been promised but not delivered in the years prior to our term. And St. Elizabeth's is one. And when I became mayor and really got into what was happening there, it was very clear that while we had a lot of discussions with major anchor institutions, we hadn't really hooked one. And so we went in first with our St. Elizabeth's entertainment and sports arena. It's about a 4,000-seat arena that is home to the Washington Mystics. And they won the championship.
Of course they do it. And I think under your mayorship,
yeah.
the Nats have won, the Mystics have won, the Caps have won. What's happening to the Redskins? What are you doing about them?
Well, that's a whole another discussion.
All right. We leave that one at that. I know I'm going to open up for some questions because there are a lot of people in the audience in a couple of more minutes. But, at the school here and the university here, we have lots of programs and initiatives focused on entrepreneurship. And I know you are focused on bringing businesses into the city. What are some of the challenges these businesses face to enter the city?
Most businesses that we're finding are very focused on being able to attract talent. And they are attracted to D.C. Because of the number of young people that are flocking to D.C. We have great institutions like George Washington, and people choose your institutions in our city because while they want good jobs, they also want good jobs that allow them to give back and are mission focused. So this is a hotbed for talent. And when they come here, they have connections to the East Coast. They have great travel. They have great nightlife, arts, culture. So this is, we're going to be a city that continues to attract people. And what we're hearing a lot from our startup community and business community is that they have to be able to attract talent. That's the chief thing. Our challenge is our ability to be able to compete with other regions who are going after those same people. And so affordability is a very, very critical to how we will continue to grow. And that's why we've been so focused on what we are doing with housing. Families and people looking for their next job spots are also very concerned about schools. Mm-hmm. And the news in D.C. around schools is just incredible, and it keeps getting better. So we made a big bet on public schools just over 10 years ago, where Mayor Fenty at the time was able to get control of the schools. So the mayor and the council are the accountability lines for public schools. And that 11 years, along with a lot of investments in buildings and pre-K and in D.C. public school teachers, continues to make D.C. the fastest improving school district and state in the country.
Great. So if you do have questions, I would like you to raise your hand so that a mic could be presented to you while I ask this question. Please raise your hands. Let me ask you another question while we are going through going around the room with the mics. Artificial intelligence, 5G, lot of technological changes. How are they going to impact the government? How are they going to be impacting, in particular, all the operations that you oversee, and what challenges can we expect?
Well, that's a good question. We have a fantastic group in D.C. government at the Office of the Chief Technology Officer that helps me stay abreast of all the latest changes. A lot that we are concerned about are privacy and security when it comes to technological change. The government owns a lot of personal information. We have the ability to collect even more so that people are concerned about the privacy of their information. So we stay focused on that as well. Security, also the cybersecurity threat on municipalities is huge. It's a business problem, as I'm sure you probably have some young people and some students here investigating how we are best prepared to protect our operations. I'm sure you're aware of a number of municipalities who are not, a lot of their operations were held hostage, and staying focused on how we deal with that as well. But then on the very positive side is, how do we use technology to change human service delivery? I think you will find a lot of technologists focused on things like transportation. And I've challenged all of them to help us think about how we're dealing with some of the huge human services challenges of our day. You may be surprised to know that when people who qualify for benefits, like food stamps or other income enhancing benefits, our way of dealing with them is we ask them to come out to a service center, stand in line, and then once they're in line outside, they stand in another line inside and then maybe they get the benefits they're entitled to. There are better ways to do that, and we have to make sure that we're identifying them. Similarly, we make huge investments in healthcare. We are the second most insured jurisdiction in the nation, second only to Massachusetts. Got a little bit of a head start on us. And why don't we have better outcomes for the investments that we make? And so we're looking to technologists to help us solve problems like how do we connect expectant moms to better prenatal? Or how do we use technology to help us follow them to healthier outcomes for themselves and their babies? So those are things that I think that we still can look to technology to do, to get kind of out of the transportation fields, because I think we're pretty well saturated there, but what are we doing about human services delivery from local governments?
Well, we are certainly glad you're thinking about all these issues. So let's open it up for questions.
Absolutely.
A few questions. Please state your name, and whatever you have as a question, please keep it short with a question mark at the end. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Mayor Bowser. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Sammy Robb, and I'm a full-time global MBA student here at GW. I'm also a taxpayer and homeowner here in DC, and my question is particular towards the infrastructure of roads and potholes in Northeast and Southeast, and what your current initiatives are to alleviating the roads and really making sure that we take care of these potholes.
Potholes. It's a frequent question for mayors, and I think, and I don't know what neighborhoods you're particularly concerned about, but so kind of let me give you the state of where I think things are. Our major arterials are in good shape. Where we have problems are in local roads. And we have set out in the last 5 years a program to eliminate all poorly rated local roads by 2024. And part of our issue has just been disinvestment or inconsistent investment. And I can go into why that happens in budgets and how skimming $1 million here and there over years compounds to the point where you have too many local roads in disrepair. So our plan, I hope you'll look it up, is called Pave DC, where we have increased annual funding to eliminate, and you can see graphs that show you how all poorly rated local roads are eliminated by 2024. Another program we have is called Alley Palooza. It's one of my favorites. I have a story as it goes. When I served on the council, I had a similar question to a DDOT director about the alleys in my ward. And he told me with a straight face, council member, if we continue with the level of investment that we have to eliminate all poorly rated roads, it'll take 40 years. And so the only way to change that is more resources and better implementation of those resources. And I think we have both now.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Hi, Mayor. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Jason Katz. I'm a senior at George Washington studying urban studies. And I thank you very much for pointing out the regional effects of the placement of Amazon's HQ2 in the rebranded zone of National Landing. Now, speaking at a regional level, there are developer-led initiatives to promote diverse housing stock in the district. And I was wondering if you could speak to public-private partnerships related to initiatives like JBG Smith's Washington Housing Initiative, which was just highlighted in Washingtonian a couple months ago. Thank you.
Well, I think JBG Smith has come up with one proposal, and I think, to be quite frank, it is best in Virginia that discussion is had, because we have tools. And so we'll add JBG's tool to our mix. But remember, I said we're 36,000 out of 240,000. So the question becomes, what's happening in Virginia? Is Virginia putting up $100 million like DC taxpayers are putting up to make sure affordable projects happen? Has Virginia outlined by jurisdiction the targets to get there? So I think that the JBG proposal is certainly one that we're eager to add to our toolbox.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you. Let's take one more question. I know the mayor has to run after this, so.
Hi, I'm Mary McDaniel. I'm a graduate of George Washington University, and my question goes to the sort of the tug of war you have with the federal issue, being the federal city. I know I've read that your emergency funds have been largely depleted because of additional security costs. Is that the responsibility of Congress to allocate funds to make that up to D.C.?
Ultimately, yes. So each year we ask the White House for allocation related to special security costs. They include the inauguration, and those costs go up. And since President Obama's first and second, and the Trump inauguration, all have had higher costs. So it's very important that we deplete that. That we replace that. But we also have costs, special events that. For example, to support the services for former President Bush. Those are costs that aren't exactly anticipated from year to year. When we have visiting delegations that the Secret Service supports, we also add support to that. If we have more than active First Amendment activity, we support that. We support all of those things too. And if there are outside events, for example, the July 4th events of this past year were extra to what are typical. So all of those things have to be replaced. So I think where we are now is that the members of the delegation, the DMV delegation, are advancing in their various committees the replacement of those funds. But it brings us to another point, and that's why we have to rely on Maryland and Virginia to replace funds that affect D.C. first, but also affect the whole region. It's because we don't have voting representation in the House, and we don't have senators. And so that becomes very critical to how we continue to do business. What we have in the case that we make for statehood for Washington, D.C., the business case for our region is important because we know we are disadvantaged in a 4 million person region by having 4 senators when we should have 6. And going to whether it's transportation or housing, schools, critical issues for our entire region would benefit from 2 more voices in the Senate.
Yes, ma'am. And I will just tell you, I live in Virginia, so I have voting representation, not to be mean about it, but I will make sure I speak up for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you should know that your senators have signed on. All the Democrats in Virginia, I think, have signed on, and there are others in Virginia that we're working on to sign on to both of the statehood bills in the House and the Senate. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'll ask you one last question, because I have been told that with experience comes wisdom, and sometimes through the experience you realize maybe I would have done something differently. Is there anything that you would have done differently if you were to start your mayor career now?
Oh, there are 1,000 things I would do differently. But like you said, you learn from each experience so that you don't repeat mistakes. I'm not a person who lives a lot with regret because all of the decisions that I made for a reason. And sometimes I get more information, or sometimes I learn that it just didn't work out the way I thought it would work out. But definitely know how not to repeat the same mistake.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Bowser. This
Dan.
has been incredible. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us today. This is the last episode for the fall season for George Talks Business. We will restart in spring. We'll be putting out the list of speakers for spring in the coming weeks. Hope you will join us again. Thank you for your support this season. Thank you again.
Thank you.